In early 2026, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace began to shift in a way that few could see, but many could feel, as quiet conversations turned into tense discussions and long-standing understandings suddenly came under review, placing Prince Edward in a position he had spent his entire life avoiding. At the center of a situation that was no longer about duty alone, but about boundaries, legacy, and the meaning of what had been promised in the past. Because for decades, Edward had remained one of the most steady and understated members of the royal family, choosing consistency over attention and loyalty over controversy, building a life alongside Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, that reflected quiet commitment rather than public spectacle. Yet everything began to change following the final decisions made by Queen Elizabeth II before her passing in 2022, as she carefully ensured that the legacy of her late husband, Prince Philip, would continue through Edward, a decision that carried not just symbolic meaning, but a deeper sense of permanence, something designed to hold its place regardless of future change. But as time moved forward and the reign of King Charles III entered a phase focused on modernization and control, internal reviews began to take shape, looking at roles, responsibilities, and even long-standing arrangements within the royal structure. And while these changes were framed as necessary evolution, they slowly began to place pressure on areas that had once seemed unquestionable, creating a sense that certain decisions from the past were no longer being treated as final. And for Edward, this raised a question that could not be ignored: whether something given with certainty could ever be quietly taken back, because what had been built over years of patience and careful planning was now being looked at through a different lens, one that prioritized structure over sentiment. And while Edward approached the situation with calm precision rather than reaction, Sophie found herself at the emotional center of a parallel tension, as her role within the family had always been defined by quiet strength and unwavering respect, earning her a unique place of trust with Queen Elizabeth II that went beyond formal titles or public appearances. And that trust had been symbolized in deeply personal ways, including gifts that represented not just royal tradition, but personal connection. And when even those symbolic elements began to be drawn into discussion, the situation crossed into something far more personal than institutional policy, creating a moment where silence was no longer sustainable. And it was at this critical point that Princess Anne stepped forward, bringing with her a clarity that cut through uncertainty. Because Anne had always been known for her directness and her unwavering understanding of duty, and she recognized immediately that the issue was not simply about individual arrangements, but about the credibility of decisions made by the monarchy itself, as allowing past commitments to be questioned would create a ripple effect that could weaken the very foundation on which royal authority stood. And her position made it clear that this was not about choosing sides, but about protecting something far larger than any one individual, forcing a moment of reflection within the palace where the implications of continuing down the same path became impossible to ignore. And while the situation never erupted into public conflict, internally it created a quiet divide between two perspectives. One focused on reshaping the monarchy into a more controlled and streamlined institution, and the other centered on preserving the integrity of what had already been established. And within that divide, Edward remained consistent, relying not on emotion, but on preparation, as everything connected to his position had been carefully structured over time, creating a foundation that could withstand scrutiny without needing public defense. And this approach ultimately shifted the direction of the situation, as what had been uncertain began to stabilize, and what had been under review quietly returned to its original standing, not through confrontation, but through recognition of what had already been put in place. And while no official statements were made and no visible resolution was presented to the public, the outcome was understood clearly within the palace walls. That certain lines could not be crossed without consequences that extended far beyond the immediate moment. And as the monarchy continued to move forward, presenting unity through appearances and tradition, the internal dynamics had undeniably changed, leaving behind a new awareness that even within one of the most structured institutions in the world, there are limits to how far change can go without challenging the very principles it depends on. And for Edward, the experience was never about seeking power or influence, but about holding on to what had already been given, proving that quiet resilience can become one of the strongest forms of strength when tested. While for the wider family, it served as a reminder that trust, once placed into decisions and commitments, carries a weight that cannot easily be adjusted without lasting impact. And although the surface of royal life remained unchanged, the reality beneath it told a different story, one of caution, understanding, and a recognition that some decisions are not meant to be revisited because they were never temporary to begin with. If you want next, I can. Turn this into voiceover script with pauses, ready for AI voice. Create high CTR YouTube thumbnail, policy safe. Make title, description, tags, pinned comment, full YouTube pack.